Hope that this will kindle your interest to explore further. The topic of today's webinar is System Security Part 2. And in this webinar, our speaker, Mr. Vijay Nagaraj from Secure Code Warrior, will provide a deep dive description of Windows and Linux security. This is a follow-up seminar to our previous webinar that was conducted on the 13th for System Security Part 1 by Mr. Jason Joseph, which was a more broad-based webinar. We are planning to conduct the next webinar on the topic Network Security Part 2, which would be by Mr. Swapnil Patnekar from Shrestha IT on 13th on the 9th of February, but we will confirm the date depending on the confirmation we receive from the speaker. And only after that we will announce the schedule and open registrations for the same. Please watch the CySecK website for more updates in this regard. That is the URL of the Samgachadram series webpage on the CySecK website. You can access all the previous webinars as well as our YouTube channel. And I'd request all of you to please subscribe to our YouTube channel. In case you're joining from an academic or industrial institution, please request your institution or organization to subscribe to our official YouTube channel. It will help you to get to know whenever any new recordings are out, and it will help us to gain better traction and visibility. Let us now discuss the scheme of webinar and the assessment. This is webinar number 53, which will first be delivered by the speaker, Mr. Vijay Nagaraj, following which there will be some Q&A. The link to the assessment for today's webinar will be mailed to the attendees by Monday or Tuesday. And the assessment will be kept open only for 60 minutes, which will be followed by webinar feedback. Webinar feedback consists of qualitative and quantitative questions, about 4 to 5 of them, which will help us in understanding the areas in which we can improve the delivery of our webinars. There are separate assessments for both parts, System Security Part 1 and System Security Part 2. The assessment for System Security Part 1 is already over, and those who have qualified for certification shall be receiving the certificate soon. We request you to please use a Gmail ID to take the assessment, as the assessment will be through Google Forms. And we also request you to continue to use the same Gmail ID for registering for all events and webinars that are organized by CySecK. So that will help us to keep track of the participant, and do not use multiple mail addresses per participant. So in order to qualify for a certificate, the assessment is a 15 MCQ assessment, 15 multiple choice questions. Each question has 4 options, out of which only one will be correct. So if you think about 15 questions in 60 minutes, we feel that you have more than ample time to attempt all the questions, because there is no negative marking. And we hope you will utilize the opportunity to learn more from whatever the speaker delivers today, and will also use the opportunity to earn a CySecK certificate. So it is now time for me to introduce our speaker for the day. Our speaker for the day is Mr. Vijay Nagaraj. He is a senior security engineer at Secure Code Warrior. This is a global security company that makes software development better and more secure. Secure Code Warrior is actually having offices all over the world, in the Americas and in Australia, but Vijay works for them from Bengaluru. And with that, I would now request Vijay to please turn on his camera and to start sharing his presentation. Yeah, Vijay, can you please turn on your camera? Yeah, CySecK control room, Vijay is not able to unmute himself. Please give him the required rights. Yeah, Vijay, I think you can share your PPT.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I think you need to be a little louder, Vijay. Your voice is coming through very feebly.
How about now? Can you guys hear me? No, it's.
Yeah, I'd request our joinees to please confirm that they can hear Vijay clearly and that he's audible, please. Okay, I'm getting a few thumbs ups. Yeah, Zamir Ahmed has raised a hand. Zamir Ahmed, can you please type in your question in the chat box? Okay, Vijay, I think you can start sharing your, yeah, you can just start sharing your PPT, please.
All right. Can you guys confirm in the chat that you're
Yeah,
able
can
to
you
see
just
my
confirm
screen?
that the PPT is visible, dear participants? Okay,
Uh,
yeah, it is visible, Vijay. I think you may want to get into screen show mode.
All right. Can everyone see the slide? I think everyone can see the slide. I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, Vijay,
Okay.
I think it will help if you come a tad closer to your microphone.
Sorry, I think it's my headphone. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it
now we
better?
can hear you much better. Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I think most of them would have seen me during the I think during face-to-face session. Uh, so myself, Vijay Nagraj, I work for a company by name Secure Code Warrior, which is a leading industry software developer security company. So today we are going to discuss more in detail about Windows security and Linux security. So first I would walk you through what Windows security is. It's going to be a little bit in detail what we cover in Windows security, and then we'll move on to Linux security. So before we move to Windows security and Linux security, I want you guys to understand the importance of system security, right? So all the applications are hosted on an operating system. So any weakness in the underlying operating system can gain you access to the application which is hosted inside the operating system. So it is very crucial for us to secure the underlying operating system on which the application is hosted. So the system security mainly covers what are the different security checks, what are the misconfigurations or security misconfigurations in the operating system which can allow an attacker to gain access into an operating system. So the most widely used operating system right now are Windows and Linux. So we would cover Windows and Linux in this session. To start with, we will go with the Windows security. So mainly, I think most of them would have. One sec, I don't know. I'm not. Okay. Can you see the slides, guys? Okay. I'm just switching over between the slides.
Yes, Vijay, we can see the change of slides.
Okay, awesome. So Windows security. So in terms of Windows security, there are three classes of operating system in Windows. One is the client operating system, server operating system, and embedded operating system. So client operating system is mainly used in your desktops, your PCs, your tablets, your phones. Server operating system is mainly used in your servers. Mainly it could be an IIS server, or it could be a DNS server, or it could be a DHCP server, wherein embedded operating system is mainly used in industry control systems, like you could have seen in your shopping centers Windows operating system to scan the barcode, and it's mainly in the POS system, like point of sales, and also in manufacturing units, or it could be in robots, or it could be in any artificial intelligence system. So these are the three classes of Windows operating system. One is client, the other one is server, the other one is embedded operating system. Let's look at client operating systems. So these are the main operating systems which we have seen. I'm sure most of them would have heard about Windows XP 2000 Workstation Vista. When I was studying, there was Windows XP and Windows 7. I'm not sure if any of us are still using Windows XP. Hopefully not. So, still using Windows XP, Darshan is saying yes. So maybe we need to look at upgrading to Windows 8 or 10. So these are different client operating systems. So we have starting from Windows 2000 Workstation up till Windows 7, 8, 10, and going up to Windows 11. So with case of client operating system, we also have Windows Phone operating system, and also in gaming consoles, we use Xbox. So these are different client operating system. In terms of client operating system, we have different editions: Starter Edition, Home Edition, and Ultimate Edition. In terms of Starter, Home, and Ultimate Editions, these are standalone licenses. So these are standalone systems. You will not be able to join into any domain controller. It provides you with standard. It's like a standalone license, right? So if you want to join, if you want to use your system for commercial purposes, let's say it's not used for the personal use, it's used for a company, then it required to be a member of domain. Then you have to go with business or professional or enterprise. When you go with the client edition, whether it could be starter or home, I think starter and home will not have BitLocker, like you can't do device encryption, stuff like that. When you go with the business or professional or enterprise edition, you can do more stuff like BitLocker, which will allow you to do disk encryption, which we will study in later. It will allow you to do disk encryption. You can join the domain. That means your system, which is a Windows operating system, can be a part of the domain. So client editions versus business, professional, enterprise editions. So these are the different editions we have. Coming to end of support, I think everyone know that there's a certain duration during which your operating system is supported by Microsoft. It has end of sales. That means Microsoft will stop selling the operating system commercially. Then it will announce end of support. Then after the end of support, what does end of support means? That means if there is any security bug in your operating system, Microsoft will not release patches for those bugs. That's what end of support means. Windows 7 has ended support in January 2020. Windows 8 has already ended support. I think this month it's going to end support. Once end of support means Microsoft will not actively release patches for your security vulnerabilities, but you can also go ahead and buy extended support. That means you need to pay a little bit of money and then get an extended support. That means you will get patches for some more time after the end of support as well. When it's end of life, that means there's no longer support, there's no longer extended support. That means it's reached end of life. Any vulnerabilities in that operating system will not be patched at all. Any new vulnerabilities will not be patched at all. You will not receive any you will not receive any patches from the Microsoft itself. So these are the end of support which I've noted. Windows 8 is already reached end of support. I think still 3 more days to go. Windows 2008 R2 is again January 2020 is already reached. 2012 as October 2023. There's no end of support yet announced for Windows Server 2016. I think even for Windows 11 is still actively under support. Server operating system. So these are the server operating systems which we have seen 2008, which is reaching end of support in October 2023. We have 2012, we have 2016, and also 2022. These are different server operating editions we have. Essentials edition, standard edition, and data center editions. How does these three editions differ? They basically differ in terms of computing. What are the different network tolerance? They basically differ in terms of computation, like how many network interfaces are supported, how many disk storages are supported. So that's how it differ. So basically the essentials would start with least amount of power, wherein the data center edition would have much more higher computation. It can support multiple network interfaces. It can support lot of multiple storage levels. So does anybody know what R2 is? Okay. So if you see the operating system, approximately every 4 years, Microsoft is releasing an operating system, right? So that's considered to be the first release. But after the release of the first release, within a span of 2 years, they do second release, which is called R2, release 2, which is 2 years later. So every span of 4 years, you have a new version of operating system, and after first version of operating system released, then you have after 2 years, then you have a second release, which includes enhancements, which includes security fixes and also bug fixes of of the bugs which has been identified in the initial release. That is R2. I'm not sure if you still have R2 in I think 2008 R2 there was available. Not sure in 2012, 2016 there's an R2 release as well. So that is what is meant by R2. Server core. Don't get confused with server core. Server core is not a separate edition of server operating system. That's why it's not listed under server editions. Server core is just an installation option. When you're installing a server operating system, it is just an installation option. Hey, do you want to just go with the core? Core means everything is command line and you can access via PowerShell. You will not have GUI. There is no GUI which is installed with server core. So if you see this server configuration, this is just a server core screenshot. It will just tell you this, it will just give you a command line option. You need to just select the option. You can go ahead and install if you want web server, if you want DNS server, you can go ahead and install. Server core is just an installation option. Please remember it is not a separate edition. It is just an option wherein you can install a base operating system with command line. Why is it important? Because you are going with the base minimal version of the operating system without any roles in it. There is no patch required. Let's say if there is if there is a vulnerability which is identified in a particular web server, server core will not have a web server installed. It is just a core operating system. It will not install any server roles on top of it. It's just a bare minimum version of the operating system. So most of the data center, like a large appliances which is used for virtual machines, they would have only bare operating system installed without any roles on top of it. That is server core. So let's say you have a server core installed. You have a Windows operating server operating system installed. Whether it could be a Windows 2008, no. Whether it could be a 2012 or 2016. There are different roles in which you can use a server operating system. One, you could use a particular server operating system as a web server. You can install an IIS web server on top of it, and it can be used as a web server so that you can host a website on inside this web server, and it can be used as a web server. The second one, it could be a domain controller. What is meant by domain controller? We're going to see it later. I think most of you would have heard what is meant by a domain controller. Domain controller, it's a group of computers which is managed by a domain active directory. So your server can be used as a domain controller, or it could be used as a DHCP server. DHCP server, I think you might have known, it is used to assign a dynamic IP addresses to all the systems within a network. Or it could be used as a DNS server. It can act as a DNS server to convert DNS domain name system to an IP address. So these are different roles in which you can pick your server operating system to operate. A server can be a domain controller, or it could be a web server, or it could be a DNS server, or it could be a, I think you know what Hyper-V is. It could be a virtualization server. If you use it as a virtualization server, you can create multiple virtual machines on top of that server, and each virtual machine can be used to host a different for a different purpose, whether it could be DNS server, it could be app server, it could be database server. So these are different roles in which you could use server roles, which you could use. Windows embedded. Here is where, as I said before, Windows is used for IoT purpose. This is more modularized than server core. You could use it in your point of sales mission whenever you are buying any shopping centers. When you're scanning a QR code, you would do the transaction, you would pay it, and you would buy the product. That's POS. It could be used in industry control systems, or it could be used in robotics and so on. This is Windows embedded. This has a different operating system. It's not a client operating system, it's not a server operating system, it's a separate operating system, which is just used for embedded systems. So what is meant by Windows workgroups? When I say Windows workgroups, the system is not part of a domain. It is There's no domain controller to manage that system. It's a standalone computer. Any user account is local and the databases are local. Permissions assigned to the users are local users and the groups. Every user have their administrators of their own mission. When you want to manage like less than 50 computers, they all work groups. So work groups are like, you can say they are standalone. There is no domain controller. You have a work group admin on each and every mission. They are not managed centrally. Let's put it in that way. Work groups, they are not managed by central domain controllers. Every system is treated as a standalone computer. If you want to manage every system inside the work group, each system will have a work group admin. They would have a separate account on each every mission. So that is work groups. So if you see a screenshot here, this system is part of a work group. If you want to see the users which are part of this workgroup, you need to type this command net.exe help user. As I said before, this all the users are local. So this will manage the local accounts. So the users are not domain users, they're the local users. So that's workgroups. Then we have something called as SID, Security Identifier. Every user in a Windows operating system have Windows Security Social. The SID is kind of a social security number for Windows. So this is a format of the SID. So we will study what these means. So each user, each computer, and each group has its own unique SID number. All Windows is cares about SID when it is enforcing permissions and privileges. It doesn't worry about what the name of the user is, whether it could be Vijay or whether it could be Abhishek. Vijay will have one unique SID, and then Abhishek would have one unique SID. This is just like a security identifier which is assigned to every user, every group, and also computer in the domain would have SID number. This is a format of the SID. If you see the screenshot on your right side, who am I? It says Shrikant is a user. You are my slash user. Shrikant is a user, and this is the SID for Shrikant. Here is a well-known SIDs which I have listed in the table. The one S100, it's a null SID. It's a group with no members. When it say 110, it's a group that includes all SID. 120, it indicates, when it says 120, it indicates it's a local user. Okay, so they're the local users. 121, that's mean they are physically logging in through console. Wherein Shrikant is 1S15. That means it's a user who's not a local user, he's a domain user. So these are the well-known SID numbers. If it starts with 110, that's a group that includes all users. If it's 120, that means it's a local user. 121, it means console login. Here, S15, that means it's not a local user, it's a domain user. So here's a sample SID numbers. So now we know what is SID. We are going to understand what is meant by SAT. SAT is nothing but security access token. So every process which you start inside a Windows operating system has an SAT attached to it. All Windows is gonna use your SAT to check your privilege and permission before you attempt accessing any resource. So what does SAT consist of? It consists of SID of your user account and SID of all the group which you belong to and what are your privileges. This is what is contained in SIT. SIT is attached to every process which you start. So if you look at this SIT, this is the SIT which your Windows will worry about. It's just like your, which is it's going to be your Windows driver's license card. Before you attempt doing any action, your Windows will use your SIT to check what are your privileges, what is your permissions, which you're going to use. which is your permission you will use to check against before you access any resource. That's what SID is. SID is like SID of your user account, SID of all your group, and all your privileges. So that's SAT. So we studied about workgroup. We do want to think about what is a domain controller. Okay. So before we study about domain controller, let's study what is Active Directory. Active Directory is like a shared registry of all the users and computers on the network. That's what Active Directory. A domain controller is a server that manages Active Directory database. That is what a domain controller is. An Active Directory is just like a registry of all the users and computers on the network, wherein a domain controller is a server operating, it's a role of an operating system, which is used to manage an Active Directory database. An Active Directory is a multi-master replicator. You could have multiple Active Directory and you can replicate the databases among multiple Active Directories. What does being the domain means? Let's see what does being in the domain means. Being in the domain means your server, your user is part of the domain and he is managed by the policy by the domain controller. And then if a system is part of the domain means that system settings and the policies on that system is managed by a domain controller. It's not managed locally. Okay, that's what being in the domain means. Users are managed by the domain and the computers are managed by the domain. Okay, users are managed by the domain means password settings of the user, when the password will expire, which systems he can log in, what are the privileges attached to the user. They're all managed by the domain controller. When a system is set to be part of the domain, that means settings of that system is also controlled by the domain controller. Okay, that's what being the domain means. Imagine earlier we work group was every mission has to have a separate user account in a work group. If you want to do some changes in one system, you have to do login to every system. Let's say you want to do changes to a system which is part of the work group. Then you have to log into every work group as a work group admin and do the changes. But wherein in terms of domain controller, you have a centralized policy through which you can push the policies to every network, sorry, to every systems which is part of the network. That's how you can manage. Okay. This is a domain controller. In terms of users, users would authenticate to a domain controller. That is where you have your Active Directory database. Once you are authenticated, then that authentication domain controller determines what are the resources you can access in this network. Okay. Authentication protocols. When you're part of a domain, the SID, because when the user is part of the domain, it is called as a domain account. And a user is because in case of a domain, the groups and users will come from Active Directory. Okay. So the SIDs of the domain accounts and the groups coming from the Active Directory, they are conveyed through the local computers through authentication protocol. We discussed about SID, right? They're constructed on the fly whenever a user requests to a resource. Okay. Let's say you're part of a domain, your user account is part of the domain, and you want to access a network share, which is part of the domain. So whenever you're part of a network share, which is part of the domain, your SAT will be constructed whenever a user requests to access that particular network share. Okay. All the privileged local account SID and local, let's say they are coming from the target computer. So you have a domain account and you have a local account. All the privileges, local account SIDs and the local group, whichever local users and local group which is part of the system, they will come from the target computer. They will not come from the domain. Okay. So the authentication protocol is basically used to convey these SID IDs. They're conveyed through the computer through how do the domain controller and your systems and the other resources as part of the network will communicate. They basically communicate via authentication protocols. I think most of them would have heard about NTLM and Kerberos, which is what we're going to say. So the authentication protocols are NTLM and Kerberos. Kerberos is the default authentication protocol. NTLM is used only when necessary. You might guys might have already studied about Kerberos protocol in detail. Kerberos requires Active Directory. Kerberos uses tickets. In that tickets, you would have SIDs. In that tickets, you will have SATs to convey the user account and group SID, which is security identifiers, to the server. So let's study what is meant by forest and trust. You can have more than one domain in your organization. Let's say CySecK. CySecK is an organization. Within CySecK, you would have multiple domains. That means, let's say CySecK is in Bangalore, it's in APAC, which is APAC region. If CySecK is in Europe, which is Europe location, then you would have apac.cysec.com is one domain. If it's in Europe, emea.cysec.com is another domain. But both the domains are in the same organization. These domains would have to trust each other because a user is in Bangalore, another user might be in London, but they are both part of the same organization. These domains have to be linked with trust because a user in Bangalore might need to access a network share which is in London, or you might need to access a web server which is in London. Then these two domains, which are part of the same organization, have to trust each other. That is why we call something called as forest. What is a forest? It's called one or more domains which trust each other is called as forest. In that you'll have inter-domain replication. That means a user which is part of Bangalore, you don't need to create the same user in Europe because they are part of the same organization, but they replicate the domain. The user gets replicated between each interdomain. Okay. You have two-way transitive trust. What is meant by two-way transitive trust? That means APAC domain trusts Europe domain and a Europe domain trusts APAC domain. We will see global catalog. Global catalog is basically, hey, what are the domains what I have across an organization? That's what global catalog is. So this is a cross which I was talking about, cross forest trust. This is a quest.com and oneidentity.com. Under quest, you have hr.quest and sales.quest. And one identity, you have hr.oneidentity and sales. These two are different domains, but the trust between each other using cross forest trust. Okay. So this is called transitive trust. Quest.com trust oneidentity.com. But within Quest, you have two different subdomains, which are nothing but, as I said before, forest, one or more domain. So this is a cross forest. This is one forest. This is one forest. So this is a cross forest trust relationship. Okay. You can see double arrow, which means, as I said before, two-way transitive trust. Okay. Quest.com has two different domain controllers. So they kind of trust each other. HR Quest, Sales Quest. So this is a domain tree for Quest.com and this is a domain tree for our identity. Both the trust, this is one forest and this is one forest. So there is a trust relationship between both the forests. So now earlier when I used to work, I think it was like a few years back, all the Active Directory was managed locally. Okay. So we used to have a domain controller which used to manage everything was like domain controller is to be managed by the company itself. But now it's in cloud. Azure, which is called Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure AD is a cloud service. It's a cloud. You don't need to create a domain controller yourself. You just go to Microsoft AD and say, hey, I want to manage these users. So this is a Microsoft AD server, which is hosted on the cloud. Once you create a user in AD, you can pretty much sync with the Active Directory and you can say, hey, these are the apps which this user can access. These are the apps which it can access. These are the cloud resources which can be accessed. And even it can sync with your on-prem applications as well. If a user account in AD, they can log on to OneDrive, which is where your files are hosted. You can also set up a multi-factor phone authentication, and it can also sync with your on-prem Active Directory. Microsoft AD is a cloud version of domain controller. So everything is managed by Microsoft itself, which is Azure AD, and then you create a user in the AD, and you that from that AD you can pretty much say, hey, these are the apps this user is allowed to access. Okay, these are the on-prem apps which it can access, which this particular user can access. And you can also sync with on-prem Active Directory. That means, let's say I have my own Active Directory which is hosted in my company. If I create a user in the domain controller which is managed by my company, it can sync with the Active Directory which is hosted in the cloud. So you can sync pretty much. So now we're coming to, as I said before, domain controllers have group policies to manage password policies. If you can see here, group policy, contoso.com is a domain. Under that domain, you have groups, you have servers, you have users. This particular contoso.com is a domain controller. You can see here, domain controller. In your right hand side, there is a screenshot. That means this particular server has been assigned a role called domain controller. So in a domain controller, you can create a group policy. With the help of a group policy, what can you manage? You can create a password policy. You can create a lockout policy. You can create permissions for the folders. You can set privileges. You can lock down registries, which is there in a local system as well as on the servers, and you can do much more. Let's study in little bit in detail about what a group policy is. So how does this group policy work? Group policies are pretty much like scripts which are stored in the Active Directory. How does it work? They're automatically applied when you boot up your system, when you log in. And you can sync with the you can sync with the group policies which is in your Active Directory 90 to 20 minutes as well. You can apply automatically. There are two types of group policy. Every computer has a local policy and also a policy which is pushed by the Active Directory controller. Okay. So there's a policy which is pushed by the domain controller, which is used to manage all the users, networks, and the computers which are belonging to your domain. And also every computer has a local group policy as well, group policy object as well. Okay. So this is a group policy management console. If you see in the group policy security syntax, these are the group policy management console. You can see here there are different settings. Deny login as a service, deny logon locally. If you see the screenshot here, there are different settings which you can see, which is for the user rights. Access credential manager as a trusted caller. Allow logon locally. That means user can log in locally. Huh? You can deny logon locally. So these are the different policies which can be defined as part of the group policy. So this is a group policy management console. Okay. So that's about group policies. That's how the group policies works. Coming to service packs and Windows updates. Most of us might have heard service packs. Service packs are basically collection of patches. Okay. So when I don't know, mm, service packs are no longer right now. They're not no longer available. But we used to have most. I think you might remember Windows XP Service Pack 2, Service Pack 1. So service packs are basically collection of patches which are tend to fix this bug. So what you could do is you could apply that patches on a test system. If it works everything fine, then you can roll out the patches for rest of the system. Right now there are no longer service packs. Only Windows are updated automatically. It's just via Windows update. Earlier we used to have service packs. This is what right now. Right now we don't have service packs. We have Windows updates. If you go into Windows right click, if you go into my computer right click settings, then you can see what are the updates which needs to be updated. So this is a screenshot which I've taken from the updates. So this is direct updates. Okay. These it will tell you, hey, do you have an update available? If you go and look at the release note, it will tell you what are the patches. Then you can choose to update. How do you keep your operating system up to date? The easy way is to stay on new changes. So these are the different bulletins which you can subscribe to. Manage, engine, community. Then you can also subscribe to Windows update as well. Then they will give you a news feed on whenever a new release patch is updated. How do the companies update if they have multiple missions? They have something called as Windows Server Update Service, which is called WSUS. So what is this service? It's centralized server which will push the patches to all the systems which is managed by a domain. It's not just Windows, it can also update your Exchange server, which is a mail server. It can also update your SQL server and a lot more else. Okay. So this is a screenshot of Windows SUS server. It's one of the role. If you pick a operating system, you can say, hey, I want this server to be an SUS server. what you can do is these are the patches which are released in the SUS server. You can go ahead and approve. Once you approve, that means, hey, these are the patches which are approved so that it can be rolled out to all the companies, to all the computers within the domain, which is managed by a company. If you're managing its desktops, let's say 100 desktops within a company, all the desktops can't be updated directly. So what you could have is you could have an SES server. SES server will receive all the patches. From the SES server, you can roll out patches to every desktop systems, every Windows systems directly. So SES server is like an update server, which will push the patches to all the servers as well as to desktops. Here you can have more control over which are the one which is approved to be pushed. Let's say there is a critical security bug in your Windows operating system. Then you can go ahead and check in your WSS server and say, these are the critical bugs which I want you to roll out immediately. Then it will roll out to all the systems which is managed by SES server. Okay? That's how you can use WSS server. Windows Autopilot. Windows Autopilot is like a desktop provision tool which is native to Windows 10. What is a desktop provisioning tool? Let's say earlier you need to have bare minimum operating system, and then all the apps which is required to work is installed on top of it. But in case of Windows Autopilot, you would automate the image with preset configurations. Let's assume a person is joining a company called XYZ. In order to work in that company, he needs Windows 10 operating system. On top of that, he needs Skype, he needs WebEx, and he needs certain softwares in order to do his day-to-day job. Earlier, what used to happen is you used to install Windows 10. On top of that, you used to install all the softwares separately. But in terms of even in case of Windows Autopilot, it's like automating your image deployment. Whenever a new desktop comes in, your IT person would say, hey, whenever a new person joins a particular team in this company, let's say XYZ company is joining a sales team, I want to have Windows 10. On top of that, these are the softwares which needs to be included as part of this because he needs all these softwares in order to do his day-to-day job. That is why we need Windows Autopilot. It's a one-time setup. You would automate what are the deployment which is required. It will restrict administrator account creation because whenever a person needs WebEx, then let's say he needs a WebEx software or he needs a Skype software or he needs some other software to do his day-to-day work, then we have to give him an admin privilege because he has to install that software. But in case of Windows Autopilot, IT would say these are the preset configurations which are required along with this operating system. Then it would create that and it would give it to that particular person. This is how Autopilot would work. Existing PC state IT, whenever a new device gets registered in Autopilot, it would say, hey, a person is registering this device. I want him to have all this software so that the new device gets delivered to the employee directly. Then it would self-deploy. Whichever softwares are required, because he is part of the Azure AD, the IT would define if the person is part of this profile, have all this software pushed to it automatically. So it would self-deploy. That's how Autopilot works. Then comes Windows Virtual Desktop. This is like you don't need any desktop right away. You don't need a laptop. You don't need a physical hardware. Like you need a laptop to access. But this is like a virtual desktop. You can access this virtual desktop virtually from anywhere. If a person is joining a company with Azure Virtual Desktop, you can pretty much log in anywhere regardless of the location. Then you would only use it for how long you are using it. In this case, the patches are managed by Azure automatically. You don't need to patch anything. The antivirus is provided by them, disk encryption is provided by them, and the beauty of this is it's fully optimized. You can use Microsoft Office 65, everything. You can use it from any location, and the security is built in case of Windows Virtual Desktop. So you would just the Microsoft would create a virtual desktop. You need to just access it. That's it. So the next one is, let's say you want to do patch management not through WSCS. There are other third-party patch management as well. You could do with IBM, you could do with Altris, you could use with Manage Engine. The companies which I used to work before, they used to use Manage Engine to manage the patches across all the Windows systems. Okay? So let's come to the importance of backups for security. Remember, regardless of how secure you are, you will get hacked or get infected. So let's say you are given a question, given a scenario. You have to choose between your perimeter firewall or having a good backup system. Which one do you choose? Do you go with perimeter firewall or a backup? Let's say you get eventually hacked. If you do not have a backup, you can't restore. So having a good enterprise-wide backup system is good for security. And not having a good enterprise system, it also on top of it, you need to have a current backups. Your current backups is required when you do a forensic. If you want to do a perform audit, who has accessed what, then you need a current having a current backup will help to compare against a baseline. Then in case of disaster, to recover from a disaster, you also need to have a current backup. And also if you want to recover from accidental data deletion, then you need to do a backup. That is the importance of backup for security. Coming to file permissions, there are different kinds of file systems: CDFS, FAT, and FAT32, XFAT, REFS, and NTFS. I think when I used to study, I've been using FAT and FAT32. I think most of them would have seen FAT and FAT32 on your pen drives and also on your floppy disk also uses FLAT and FLAT32. So these are all different file systems, CDFS, FLAT32. But if you want to use a file system on a server, always use NTFS, because NTFS file system provides permissions, auditing, encryption, compression of the files, and also it's also a file system which can be used for transactions. It's a transactional. Okay. So this is an example of NTFS access control, which is called DACL, which is discretionary access control list. NTFS DACLs are always enforced because when you go with any file system which is formatted with NTFS file system, if you right click on any program files, I've taken a screenshot of the permissions here. You can see this is an example of NTFS DACL. You can see create owner, system, administrators, users, and trusted installer on your right. These are the NTFS DACLs. They're always enforced even with local users, IIS users, if it's a remote desktop protocol or a shared users. So if you want to set the permission via command line, you can use ICACLS. Through PowerShell, if you want to set the permission, you can use set ACL. If you want to set it through UI, then you need to go with right click properties and go for the security tab. You would see these permissions. These are available only via NTFS DACLs. Okay. This is an advanced setting. You might have seen advanced setting as well. If you see here, for every user, you would have advanced settings. So this is an advanced setting of ACE. This is a basic setting, but you can also choose to do an advanced setting for each user here. You can see Michael is allowed. Michael is allowed. Is a full control. Tom has full control, where an admin user has a full control and tech leaders have special. So these are the advanced security setting for common folder. Okay. This is an advanced setting for ACE. NTFS owners. This is by default, every folder would have a creator or a owner. So this owner will have a full control on every folder which is created. So this is a setting for NTFS owners. This is a default setting for NTFS owners. So in terms of NTFS security, what is the what is the principle? As I said, principle of least security. You have gone through multiple subjects. There's always a principle of least privilege, right? With NTFS permissions, always assign permission on need-to-need basis. Go with default deny and then add the permissions on top of it. Perform a need analysis on a job role. Hey, does this job role require all these permissions? Then grant with a minimum privilege that still permits the user to get their work done. If they need more permissions, then assign more permissions. By default, start with the minimal permissions. A good DACL to default to is system should have full control, administrator should have full control, creator or the owner of the file should have full control, and all the authenticated users should have read and execute or modify. So this is the least good DACL to start with. This is the least privilege. If you need more, then you can go ahead and edit the permissions and assign more privilege. So AD users on the computer, this is the AD users on the computer. You can see there's a new group. You can see here group scope is global and the group type is a security group. This is a group which gets created by name remote employees. This is a security group. Even to a group, you can assign privileges and permissions. So when I say security group, you can assign permissions and privileges are assigned to them. Distribution group is only used for mailing. Let's say if you want to mail to multiple employees, then you can create a distribution group so that it can use as a mailing list. But when you create a security group, you can manage the group, you can assign privileges, and you can assign permissions. Okay. Let's say you're in this screenshot, you're creating a remote employee security group. That means when a person is part of a remote employee security group, he's allowed to access this particular share. You can create a privilege and you can assign a permission. Wherein in case of a distribution group, it is just used for mailing purpose. It's not used to assign privileges or permissions. So this is what you can see here on the screenshot. There are multiple contractors as a group. Yep. In that group, it's a security group. In that group, you have all these users. They are the contractors. You can see a domain by name enterprise.com, and inside that you have a group by name contractors. In that contractors, you have all these users. Now in this screenshot, you're basically trying to add a user to this security group. Okay. You can see in Windows, you can do share folders as well, right? So shared folders basically use SNB or CIFS protocol. Even the shared folders have permissions. So shared DACLs are ignored for local access. So possible share permissions you can see here. So this is per special. That's a folder which has been shared by this name. And there's a user which is assigned to do a share permission. Test 3 can read and write from the share. So you can see that's the network path name, which is a sharing name, and special. There is a folder by name special, and you're sharing it. The network path is assigned here. And what is the share permission for test 3? Test 3 can read and write. Okay. You can also assign permissions for shared folder. Please remember, in case of sharing permissions for the folder, you can inherit the permissions from the root directory, but here there is no inheritance of shared permissions. Possible share permissions are full control, change, and read. So these are the possible, but here we have given read and write. Okay. Hidden shares, administrative shares. Let's say C share. Okay. So these are hidden shares and administrative shares. So when you go log into system, C drive can be accessed as part of a sharing as well. If you access like C dollar. Let's say if you want to access a particular C drive, if the sharing is enabled, if the hidden sharing is enabled, from one system you can access / computer ABC / C dollar. Then you can access C drive of, it's called administrative share of a different computer. If you want to disable it, go to computer management, go to shares. You can see these are admin dollar, C dollar. These are administrative shares. You can right click and stop sharing them. These are hidden. Okay. Coming to registry, most of them would have known what registries are. Registries are basically the settings which are stored inside. They are basically the config settings for the apps and the users which are installed in your locally. Let's say if you see here, Adobe software, Photoshop 13.0, they have registry setting which says, hey, here is where the app is installed. here is where the plugin is installed. So these are hives: H key class root, H key current user, H key local machine. They are called hives. Within these hives, you have keys for each keys. So these are called keys. Within each keys, you have values. So application path is a value which is set to this data. Plugin path is a value which is set to this data. So these are registries. Registries are basically configuration settings of the systems, or it could be a configuration setting of the user, or it could be a configuration setting of a software which is stored, which is installed in your system. Okay. Even these registries have settings. If you go to the registry particular hive or a key, right click and look at the permissions, you will be able to see the permissions of the registries. They do have permissions, but they can inherit. Let's say command can inherit from shell, which is the parent, or they can inherit the permissions from the parent keys, or you can set them on their own. So how can you share? So we discussed about DACLs for a folder, for a share, and also for registry, right? How should we all these DACLs be changed? They're all changed by applying a template through a group policy. We will see here. We will see that in a later. So how these DACLs be changed by applying a template? We'll see the template later. So BitLocker, as I said earlier, BitLocker is a service provided by the Microsoft itself, which provides whole disk encryption. Why do you need whole disk encryption? Let's say you have a laptop which has sensitive data stored in your laptop. Either it could be a company data or it could be your personal data. If it is encrypted, if somebody steals your laptop, then the storage at encryption in place, which will prevent from unauthorized access because there is whole disk encryption. If the hard disk is stolen, they can't they can't unlock the hard disk unless they know the pin to unlock the drive. BitLocker is a whole disk encryption service which is provided. The sectors are encrypted with AES 128-bit or 256-bit. You can also boot up when you're booting up. So the boot record is checked with TPM. TPM is called Trusted Platform Module. BitLocker can integrate with TPM. TPM basically provides an hardware which you can put it onto your desktop, and it authenticates with the two-factor token on that hardware. It can also support BitLocker can also support USB encryption. In case if you forget a pin, then you can recover from emergency recovery pin. And it also supports self-encrypting hard drives, which means the hard drives can encrypt by default through the policy. Okay. TPM is a chip in your motherboard which performs the encryption hashing, and it performs random key generation and other cryptographic services. It is similar to built-in smart card. Earlier we can have a smart card, but this is a smart card. It can be used as a smart card. Okay, it's similar to built-in smart card. It is not designed for Microsoft, not just for Microsoft, but it can work with Linux too. So BitLocker can integrate with TPM as well. It's a chip in your platform, in your motherboard, which can provide encryption hashing services. Okay. UEFI Secure Boot. This is a replacement of your older BIOS. It's called Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. The secure boot is basically it's going to validate the digital signature of all your boot up libraries and the firmware when the systems boot up. It will basically check all your boot libraries and checks for the digital services. And it also, when it's booting up, it also check for early load of antivirus drivers. Okay. This can also integrate with TPM and BitLocker. This UEFI Secure Boot can also integrate with TPM and BitLocker. It is recommended so that UEFI can integrate with your TPM and BitLocker as well. I think we discussed about registry DACLs and then folder DACLs, user policies, and then lockout password policies. All this can be enforced. How dare we enforce through security policies? But security policies can also have templates. Templates are like stamps, okay? They are basically look like a rubber stamp. It can be applied to multiple missions to have consistent security settings. What is there in template? In that template, you will have password policies, you can have lockout policies. We also discussed about registry permissions. We discussed about NTFS permissions. You can also have privileges. All this can be put into template, and that template can be applied to multiple missions. Template is a way to enforce security policies. In that templates, you can define multiple policies. Then you can tell to your domain controller, hey, take this template and enforce the security policies across all the missions. So this is an example of the template. You can see security template, password policy. You can basically say, hey, how long, what is the maximum password age? What is the minimum password age? What is the minimum password length? How long the password, how long you want to maintain password history. Okay. Similarly, you can define lockout policies. Let's say 3 times you enter incorrect password, then you lock out the user. Then the user has to reach out to help desk to manually unlock. These are all defined in the password security template. Template, do you need to start from scratch? No. We already have pre-configured and debug templates, which is provided by NIST and Microsoft with collaboration with NSA. You can download this template for free from Microsoft Security Compliance, the manager. This includes various templates for different products. For example, Windows 11, which is a desktop operating system, that would have a different security template. Let's say you want to apply a template to a web server, that would have a different security template. So this is a SCA template. So So Microsoft Security Compliance Manager, that is in short called as SCA. So SCA snap-in, you can see here, there's a snapshot of the template. So that's how you apply security policies through templates. Now, I discussed before about global GPOs, right? Domain GPOs. This is the local GPOs. Local GPO is nothing but a collection of group policy that is only applied to the local computer and the users who log on to the computer. Okay, this is not the domain GPO. This is a local which is stored locally in the system. Okay, local GPOs are basically used when policy settings needs to be applied to a single computer or a user who log on to that computer. Local GPOs exist on all default. By default, it will exist on all Windows computers. Domain GPO is like a group of settings that is created by group policy editor. Domain GPOs can be associated with a single domain or it could be associated with the multiple Active Directory controls. Okay. So we discussed about local and domain GPO, Microsoft Baseline Analyzer. So far, so this is what is important. So I think it's now called as Microsoft Security Compliance Toolkit. When you run this toolkit against any system, you can see from the screenshot, it will basically check all your system settings against a industry best practice. It's just like a vulnerability scanner, which will identify all these security misconfigurations. And if you're missing any security patches, and it will let you know, hey, these are the systems which needs to be updated. These are the patches which you needs to be installed. If you look at on your right, it says, hey, some user accounts have non-expiring passwords. User password has to expire and they have to change the password as a best practice. But this Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer has reported that there are some users when your system have have no password expiration, then you need to go ahead and change the setting for that user so that they can have password expiry in place. Another thing is more than 2 administrators were found on the system. That means a system should have one administrator. It said, hey, you have more than 2 administrators on the system. And then there is one more setting which says some user accounts have blank or simple passwords. So some user accounts have no passwords at all, or it could have simple passwords. So this Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer will go ahead and scan your system looking for security misconfigurations. An example would be password expiry not in place, or password aging not being configured, or it can also scan for updates like, hey, you are missing all the security updates, go ahead and install it. That's what MBA is, Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. So I think this pretty much is the Windows security stuff. Uh, I don't know if I'm still on time or if it's time to take Q&A.
I think you can still continue for some time.
Okay, because let me check what's the time. 4:37. Still I have to finish. What time does it end, Abhishek? 5:15?
5, yeah, we can go up to 5:15.
Okay, still I need to cover, I need to finish Linux as well. Okay, let's see. Let's see how far we can go. Yeah. All right, that's Windows security. Now let's move on to Linux security.
I hope the participants can see the Linux security presentation.
If you can see, please give a thumbs up.
Please give a thumbs up or say a yes in the chat.
Okay. Yep, coming to Linux security. So today morning when I was preparing this slide, I saw, okay, let's check what is the operating system market share. So mostly it's Windows, around 75% is Windows. Then OS X and Linux, second highest was OS X, and the third one is like unknown, but still Unix is most. So the most common is Windows, and the second one is OS X, and third I can think of as Linux. That's the operating system market share. I think it was as of December 2022. So being Unix and OS X or Linux is the second most common. Let's see the different variants of Unix. One is Cygwin. Cygwin is basically a Linux on top of Windows. Cygwin is for Windows. Let's say you want to provide Linux capabilities in Windows. It's not a virtual machine. It's not a Linux virtual machine. It just set off a Linux libraries or GNU libraries installed on top of Windows. Okay, that's a different variant of Unix. OS X is one variant of Unix. Two major Linux distributions. One is Ubuntu, which is Debian based. The other one is Fedora, which is Red Hat based. Let's look for Cygwin. Cygwin for Windows, it's basically a collection of GNU and open source tools which provides functionality similar to Linux distribution. Please remember, it is not a Linux. It provides some Linux and utilities. It is not a replacement for running Linux in a virtual machine. If you want to test Linux kind of a command on Windows, it's a Cygwin. Go for Cygwin. It's a simple exe file. It's a DLL file which provides POSIX API functionality. It is similar. You can run some commands, Linux commands and utilities. Remember, it is not a replacement of running a Linux in a virtual machine. Okay. I can see some questions. I can take that questions after the session. That Cygwin OS X is the second most popular in the world. It's also based on Unix, but it's a proprietary which is managed by Apple. Before Mac OS X, there was Mac OS. With Mac OS X, most of the people are started using the desktops, like Mac systems are getting very familiar. What are the security features which are built in Mac OS X? First one is password assistant, which it's a tool which grades the strength of your password if the password is strong enough or not. File vault, it's a disk encryption which allows the Mac OS X the disk to be encrypted. You also have OpenSSH, which is a strong SSH connection. You have personal firewall, which is turned on by default, and all the network services are disabled by default in Mac OS X. Ubuntu, again, it's based on Debian Linux. Ubuntu comes with desktop edition and server editions. In Ubuntu, if you want to do package management, you do it via apt. I think most of them would know apt get package, apt install package. That's how you manage packages in Ubuntu. There is no graphical firewall included in Ubuntu. When in case of Fedora, it's based on Red Hat Linux. When you're installing Fedora, you can choose whether you're installing it for desktop, server, or anything. In Fedora, you do RPM based package management using minstall. Firewall is included in Fedora, but it's enabled by default. Okay. Live CDs, most of them would have seen live CDs, wherein you run the operating system off a DVD or a CD. You can also run an operating system within a virtual. Even ISO can be run within a virtual machine. These live CDs have tools installed, no hardware required. When do you use these live CDs? Let's say you want to do some testing. Let's say you want to do some, like I do my demos in live CDs because I don't want to create virtual machine. It's just a small live CD, just install, you run it. After the live, when you turn off, all the all the demo what you have done is gone. So no hardware is required. It is excellent for the forensic work as well. So no need to give any explanation, because most of them would have know how Linux operating system works. Basically, you have a hardware kernel. Kernel is basically a piece of a software which is installed in the memory, which is running in your RAM, which has access to install, which has direct access, which can interact with your hardware. Above this kernel, you have shell. Users interact with the shell. On top of the shell, you have your applications and utilities installed. You all know what is kernel. Kernel is the one which manages this hardware and executing process. What is the job of the kernel? It is managing a file system. It basically provides low-level network protocol support like IP. Then it does process management and memory management. This is a logical file system of any Unix system. You have slash. It's not I, it's slash, which is your root operating system, root file system. From slash, you have bin. Bin is where all the executables and the libraries, binaries are installed. The slash dev is is the place where the device files are there. Remember, can anyone tell me in the chat where is the operating system installed? Let's pause for a minute. Can anyone tell me in this logical file system where is the operating system installed? Someone said bin. It's in slash user slash bin. Slash user is where the operating system is installed, and from slash bin is where all the executable binaries are. Slash user is where it's usually read only. That is where the operating system is installed. Okay. Under slash user, you have user 1, user 2, user 3. These are the home directories for each particular user within the Unix. Temp is a directory where all the temporary file resides. etc is a place where all the user and user informations are stored. Basically, etc is a place where user and the password informations are stored. Okay, that's a logical file system of the user Unix system. How do you see the logical file system? Everyone would have know df command, df-hell. We can see this is a file system, what's the size, what's used, what is available, what is the percentage of its used, what is the mount point. You can see slash dev is a mount point. These are the physical partitions which are mounted to a mount point. You can see slash dev root file system. You can see different other file system called run. Okay, so that's the df command. Df command will basically give you list of partitions and the mount points. What is this? What is the size? What is the total size? What is used and what is available? Okay. So coming to file system security goals. As the OS binaries are installed in slash user directory, you need to protect this OS binaries. That's your goal. Does anyone know what SUID, SetUID, and SetGID is? Can you give me a thumbs up? Are you guys aware of SetUID and SetGID? If you don't know, just give thumbs down. Are you guys aware of SetUID and SetGID in Unix? That's a special permission bits. Okay. 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 So we will discuss about SetUID, SetGID. So basically, you need to prevent introduction of SetUID programs and unauthorized device files. You need to allow the software to be installed and you need to update this operating system. Then also you need to avoid denial of service attacks. So these are the file system security goals. So when I say denial of service attacks, what kind of denial of service attacks I'm talking about? Let's say you have done one single partition. Operating system is stored in one partition. your temp is stored in one partition, your log messages are stored in one partition. Your, let's say an attacker takes over your system and your logs are growing. If you're not done the partition correctly, if your operating system partition, then your user directory, then your log messages, if everything is stored in the same partition, you are vulnerable to denial of service attack, because as your log systems are growing, your partition might grow, and then your operating system will not be able to work because everything is in the same partition. Then you are vulnerable to denial of service attack. We will see we will see what are the file system security that we need to consider. The first one is, when you're mounting any file system, it needs to be a file system can be mounted read only. That's RO option. That means files and directories cannot be modified. The second option is no SUID. That means when the file systems are mounted with no SUID option, the set SUID, which is SUID, set GID, which is SGID, are ignored. The third option is no div. No div means by default, the device files within /dev works. If there are device files in any other directory apart from /dev, they won't work. Okay? When you're mounting a mount point, when you're mounting a partition, if it is set to R only, RO, that means you can't, that particular partition is meant for read only. You can't create files, you can't modify files. Okay? When you're mounting it as no SUID, that means set GUID, set GID will not work on any programs. When you're mounting with no DEV, that means device files in that particular mount point will not work. So this is a golden rule to be followed. All the file system should neither be mounted read-only or no SUID. What does it mean? So as I said, user local contains, that is where your all SUID, SGID programs will be, but can be read-only. So you can basically set these two directories to be read-only, but no SUID. Okay, so these two particular directories can be read-only, but you can mount this to be read-only, but you can mount these two directories to be read-only, but because these two have SUID and SGID programs. I'm going to talk about SUID and SGID later. Okay, where in other file systems we can set them to be writable. That means read-only flag should not exist, but you can have no SUID, no GID program turned on. Okay, /devices contain, only these two partitions can contain device files, wherein if you're mounting other file systems, they can be mounted as no dev. Okay, so that's the file system security. Remember, RO, which is read only, no SUID, no dev. Your root operating system, where you have operating system files and your programs, that needs to be mounted as read only, because that has programs which has set UID and set GID programs. Where in other file system, you can mount them to be writable, but have this flag turned on, no SUID, have them turned on. No dev, only your partition which contains device files should be mounted with /dev option. Sorry, with this option, no dev. All other partitions should be mounted with no dev. So this is a file system security which need to be taken care. Coming to shell, you all know what is shell. Shell is a command line interpreter that a person uses to, that's how the person interacts with the computer. It's just like it provides a user with the interface. There are different types of shell: Bourne shell, C shell, and a Conch shell. Let's look at file permissions. Everyone would know what file permissions. I think this everyone would know. These are the file permissions. First bit will tell you whether it's a file type, is a directory, or it's a normal file, or it could be a piped file. Rest is all permissions for users, groups, and others. Number of links, owner of the file, group owner of the file, size in the file, last modified, and the name of the file. These are the file attributes. File permissions, everyone would know. First group will tell you whether it's a directory or it's a file. Second, 3 RWX, this stands for read, write, and execute permissions of the file, which is the owner of the file. The third section is read, write, and execute permissions for the members of the group owning the file. And the last section is going to be read, write permission for all other groups, for all other users. So that's file permissions, absolute file modes. We all know this. User, group, other. When it says 7, that means all three permissions. When it says 5, you all know, right? I think everyone know about file permissions. It's octal, 3-digit, 7 to 1 weightage. If all three are enabled, it will be 7. If you do not write, then use disable, then 4 plus 1 is 5. You want read and read to be enabled, then it's 100, which is 4. So these are the absolute number file permission numbers. So these are the special file permission bits I was talking about. This is very, very critical. Okay. In addition to RWX, have you heard about S as well? Like the first S stands for SUID. The second one stands for SGID and third one stands for sticky. Have you guys heard about this? Set UID, set GID, and sticky bit. Please give a thumbs up if you know. Okay. I think most of us do not know the special file permission bits. Okay. So how do I say this? Okay, set UID and set GID. When I set, this is how it looks. When S is set here, the first one, that means it's a set UID program. This indicates a program is set UID, SUID. The second S means that this program is set GID. The third T means indicates that program is sticky. So what set SUID or set GID means on a file? When a set UID is set on a particular program, that means when a program is executed, so this program will be executed with the file owner's permission rather than the person who is executing it. That is what set UID means. Okay. I'll repeat again. When a set UID bit is set on a particular file, that means when a particular user is executing that program is run with the permission of the owner of the file rather than the permission of the user who is executing it. Makes sense? Can you guys give a thumbs up? I'll give an example. Let's say you want to change the password of a user in a Unix system. What is the command? PASSWD, right? When you run that command, you change the password. Where does the password information is stored? It would be stored in etc password or it could be etc shadow. Can you guys change the content of etc password and etc shadow? No. A normal user cannot change the content of these two files. So because then how does the command to change the password will update those two files? That is when the set UID will come into picture. When you run a command, when you run a particular program with set UID bit turned on, that particular program is as a run with the permission of the user who created, with the permission of the file owner, rather than the person who is executing it. When you change the password, when you run a password command, it is run as a owner. Who is the owner of the password command? It's a super user, right? So when you run it, your permission does not apply. Rather, the permission of the file owner applies. That's how when you run a password command, you can change it changes the content of the etc password file. Makes sense? Can you give a thumbs up here if it makes sense? Okay. Set UID means if a set UID is turned on a particular program, when a person runs a program which has set UID bit turned on, that means his permission doesn't apply. The file owner's permission is applied. That's it. Okay. Similar to set UID, you have set GID. Here, it is a group of an executive program. Like file owner group is applied. His permission is applied rather than the file. Okay. Set UID, set GID is fine. What is sticky? Sticky bit. If it is turned on a file, that means the memory sticks, the program will stick in the memory after execution. That's what sticky is. Okay. It indicates the program is sticky. That means the program will reside in the memory even after execution. When you can see the special permission on the file and as well as on the directory. When the set UID is, we'd already discussed about on the file. Let's see what it is on the directory. When it is set on the directory, file created in this directory inherits its UID. Same thing when it is set on the directory for set GID, it is inherited GID. In case of sticky bit, when it is set on the file, the program will stick in memory after execution. When it is set on a directory, any user can create a file, but only the owner of a file can delete it. That's what it is on a directory. So this special permission bits matters because let's say a user brings in a USB with his own copy of a password command with set UID bit turned on. If you mount a partition with no set UID, then pretty much that partition can allow a copy of a command with SUID set, right? If you have SID set, that means password command. If you're creating your own copy of a password command, that means with SUID command set, if your partition allows set UID programs, then pretty much I can, as an attacker, I can bring in my own program with this set UID permission set UID bit set, then I can take over the root privilege. That's pretty much it is. Unix system cannot live with SUID, SGID programs, but you have to keep track of what SUID, SGID program which is provided by the operating system and what new SUID, SGID programs which is introduced by the user. You need to keep track of it. That is why it is important to allow only SUID, SGID program which is provided by the operating system itself. If the user needs to provide, you need to keep track of them. Do not allow rogue SUID, unauthorized SUID or SGID programs. Okay. So you can see from this screenshot, RWX, I think you all know how it works on file and directory. Only thing you need to know about is the new permission bits, which is SUID, SGID, and the sticky bit. Okay. So why did you study all this? Because when it comes to file system security, you need to look out for world writable directories. What do you mean by world writable directories? World writable directories means pretty much everybody has a permission to write inside that directory. If you log into any system, I usually create my files in temp directory because temp directory is used by all the programs to hold intermediate results. Avoid creating world writable directories. That means these are the directories in which everyone has all pretty much all the permissions. You can read, write, you can create. You can avoid world writable directories if possible. If not, you need to set sticky bit for world writable directories. How do you set sticky bit? By using what is that file? What is the command you guys use to change the permission of the file? Can you guys type in the command? What is the command which is used in Unix to change the permission of the file? Yeah, perfect, Sachin. Chmod. Using the same chmod command, you can go ahead and set a sticky bit as well for world writable directories. World writable directories, I repeat again, world writable directories are basically the directories which allows everyone to create files, read, write, execute. Temp is one of the world writable directories. Okay. Look out, because I said you to look out for SUID, SGID programs. You need to make a list of all programs which is provided with your operating system. If you come up with some program which has SUID, SGID set, then you need to raise an alarm, because this is something which is hey, you come up with anything like weird programs which has unauthorized or some program which is introduced by the user with SUID, SGID programs, then you can raise an alarm. How do you look out for world writable directories? How do you look out for SUID, SGID programs? You can basically use find command. This is a find command which is looking for files which has permission W. Find is a command. It's looking for world writable files. It's looking under directory xdev. Type is a file. Permission is writable. World writable directories type is changed from F to D because you're looking for a directory. If you remove this dir xdev, that means you're basically looking for everything in the file system. If you just give find slash, remove this directory xdev, and you can do type. Basically, you can look everything world writable files from the root system itself, root file system itself. This is how you look for finding writable files, finding world writable directories. How do you find a set GUID? You can use find dot, that means in the current directory, sorry, in the root directory, permission is 4000. Again, it is using absolute file mode. So you can see here RWS. That means it has set UID. It's looking for set UID programs. These are all the files you can see here as RWS. Okay. This is for looking for set UID programs. The next command is looking for set GID programs. If you give permission as 2000. If you can see here, there are certain programs which are looking for, which has set GID turned on. You can see in the directory permissions, the group has the last bit of group permissions as S in it. So this has the programs which has set GID turned on. How do you set the permissions with chmod? You can use chmod. Using the chmod, you can create programs, you can change, sorry, cannot create programs. You can set the permissions of the program, and also you can set UID, you can set GIDs as well. So that's about file permissions. Let's look at unique password systems. Abhishek, am I running out of time or still have time?
Yeah, I think you should be able to conclude in maybe another 5 minutes.
Let's see how much slides I have.
Or 10 minutes.
I'm at 20th slide, but I have 44 slides to cover. Okay. Let's see how far I can go. Sorry, I'm not able to see your, but I see few people typing your questions, but I'm not able to, like, I can pick up the questions later. We are running out of time already. So Unix password systems, I think I'm gonna go quickly because we're running out of time. Everyone would know how the Unix password system. Every user have Unix username and a password. Username is just for our convenience, but internally you have every user have user IDs. Okay, so UIDs. That's how internally Unix stores. Everyone would know super user. By default, Unix system would have all or nothing security model. By convention, username, super account, super username is named as, super user account is named as root. UIDs and the super user. All the super user would have user ID as 0. If you go into etc password, you can find other usernames with UID as 0. They exist, but you are not, the permission would be locked in. You are not usually locked. You're not allowed to log in. Attackers generally they try to create users with UID 0 so that they can get root access. That means super user access. Remember, super users have UID 0. Okay. How do you get super user access? By default, as a best practice, you need to normally log in as a normal user. Then you can use a command called su or sudo to gain super user access, right? Can you log in as a normal user? Sorry, can you log in as a super user? No, that's bad. Because let's say I'm logging as a normal user and some other user, sorry, I'm logging as a root user using a root password and some other user logging in as a root password. Do we have accountability on who has done what actions? No. There is no accountability. There is no audit trails. And it's good to disable root login and create normal users. Best practice is to log in as a normal user and you can use sudo or su command to gain root access. Okay? System accounts. Remember, when you install a Unix system, it comes up with lots of user accounts for various purpose. If you go to etc password, when you do a cat on etc password, you can see different accounts. All these accounts, which comes with default when you install a system, when you install a Unix system, they are all termed with system accounts. They all are accounts with lower UIDs. That means less than, I think less than 500 or less than 1000, depending on the flavor of the Unix system which you are using. Attackers may activate this account so they can use it as a backdoors. An example you might see in, if you go to etc password, there is a separate user to run web server which is called as www. There is separate server which is used to run telnet. You can see different users to run for different apps. Okay. These users are numbered with lower UID numbers because they are system accounts. Password file. This is very important. All the all the user information are stored in etc password. You can see it's a content of an etc password. The first one is the username. Second one is SysX. What does it means is the password information is not stored in the password file. Instead, it is stored in the shadow file. If you remove X from here, that means user will be allowed to log in without the password. The next field represents UID, which is 0. As I said earlier, user ID 0 means he is a super user. The next field shows the group ID number of the user. Sorry, the next one shows the group ID number. The second one, this one is a group. The next one is a user home directory. The last one is a shell. This is the content of the password file. Shadow file. Shadow file. Most latest Unix system does not store the password in the password file. Instead, the passwords are stored in the shadow file. You can see this is a username. 2A, that's a hashing format. 2B, that's a salt. 2C, this is the hash password which is encrypted. Third one is the last password change. And the fourth one is the minimum password age. That means there's no password age at all. Maximum age is 999. That means there is no password aging. Warning is here. Inactivity period, everything is blank. We will talk about password aging later. But here what you need to understand is the password is stored in etc shadow and it is salted and hashed. Okay. And the etc shadow file does not just contain the information about the password, but it also contains the information about password aging. When I say password aging, that means how long the password is valid. What is the minimum age of the password? When can the when can the user can change the password? How long he can, when does the password expire? If the account is not used for a particular period, what is the inactivity period? That's number 7. When does the user account expire? That is what is the password aging is all about. So this is password. This is how you add the user, right? Add user command. Because a normal user cannot execute this add user command. He is doing a sudo add user and he is giving the username. As soon as they enter the username, he is creating a password. As soon as the user is created, a new user is created, new group is created, he is adding a new user to this new group and creating a home directory for the new user and is copying the files for the shell. Okay, that's how add user. Add user is basically creating a new user and is creating a new group for the user, adding a new user to the group. That's a group ID. Password aging. Password aging is defined in the file name called etclogin.defs. See here, there are different settings. Max pass days. Maximum number of days a password may be used. Let's say you change a password today, you are allowed to use for 90 days. After 90 days, you are forced to change the password. Min days. Maximum number of days allotted between password change. Let's say you change the password today. Can you change it immediately another password? Yes. If you set min days to 3, that means if you change the password today, only after 3 days you can change it to another password. Minimum length. What's the minimum length of the password? Warn age. That means, hey, give me a warning message 7 days before the password gets expired. That's all settings have been defined in login.defs. Here is where the UID which is assigned for system accounts 201 to 999. All the UID for the system accounts will be between 209 to 999. And for the user accounts which is created by you guys using a user add command will be between 1000 to 60,000. All these settings are defined in login.defs. So here is where you can view the password aging information for a user called Tom. So here, what you're doing to do is chage, which is password aging. You're doing a sudo because you need a superuser to change. You're setting an expiry of for user Tom, which is 2025-12-31. You set an expiry for Tom. Hey, this particular user expires on December 31st, 2025. If you want to view the password aging information, you do chage-l Tom. Then it will list the password information. Password never expires, password inactive. This account expires on December 31st, 2025. This is how you change the password expiration by using chage, but you can also view the information of password aging by using chage command. PAM. PAM stands for Pluggable Authentication Module. It's a library to handle authentication. Within PAM, there are different groups to handle authentication, password, password, passwords, to handle sessions, to handle accounts. All the configs for PAM module is stored in etcpam.d. Let's say how you can enforce stronger password using PAM. If the PAM has been installed, you go ahead and edit pam.d password file, and this is what you're going to do. What it says is, I'm going to basically use a module called password, and the module which I'm using is password cracklib.so. What it says, you can retry 2 times. That means you can log in twice with an incorrect password. Min length 8, that means minimum length of the password should be 8. DIFOK 6, that means your password should be different from the old password. At least 6 characters has to be different. Let's say password, you have to use the next password has to be 6 character different from the old password. D credit 1 means at least 1 digit. U credit 1 means 1 uppercase. O credit means other character 1. L credit means 1 lowercase. This is how you define a stronger password using PAM module. Okay. And then when you are logging in, the second line says you need to store this password using SHA-512 inside a shadow file. You need to use 512 SHA-512 hashing algorithm to use and store this in the shadow file. This is how you enforce stronger password using PAM module. Here you can see cat password inside pam.d is trying to list the password file. That's a file. You can see in this password file, you can see the settings which is defined here. PAM required, PAM cracklib.so. All what I've listed in the example in the previous slide is listed here. Okay, that's how you can use PAM module to enforce stronger password. Then you can also use SC Linux. SC Linux is basically a security architecture for Linux. So basically what SC Linux is, everything will be labeled, all the objects will be labeled, and the permission policies will be defined in the SC Linux server. Whenever you request for it will contact an SE Linux server. It will check against the policy. If the permission is granted, then it will allow you to access a file. If it is no, then it will give a deny message. Basically, it is like it allows the administrator to have more control over what can be accessed to our system. In terms of SE Linux, you need to label everything. You need to label. So basically here a process can access a file will be labeled, and in an SE Linux server, you will define a policy saying that this particular process can access this file. Then it will contact an SE Linux server, check against the policy. If the permission is allowed, it will go ahead and access the object, otherwise it will be denied. Okay. Another one is App Armor. App Armor is also an easy way to protect your Linux system. It will protect your Linux system basically from any internal or external threat. App Armor has two modes of execution. One is a learning, wherein violations are permitted and logged. It will not deny anything. It will say, "Hey, I'm seeing a particular user is accessing. I'm seeing a particular process accessing a particular file. You defined a policy to deny this file. I'm gonna allow this, but I'm gonna still allow, but your policy is saying it's denied." It's learning profile. It will learn. But when you go to enforced, your policy starts enforced. That means the user is denied from particular accessing. A process is denied from accessing a particular policy, but still it will be logged. Okay, those are two modes. A difference between SE Linux and App Armor is App Armor works by granting access first and then applying restrictions, wherein SE Linux restricts access to all the applications by default and grants access only to those users that present proper certifications. AppArmor will work by granting access first and then apply restrictions, wherein SE Linux will restrict all the applications by default and then it will provide access. If you look at the features here, uh, look at the last line. Features path name based does not require labeling or relabeling. Sorry, I was bad. I think I was saying SE Linux requires labeling. No, AppArmor requires labeling, but wherein SE Linux is based on path name, not based on labels. AppArmor is easier for new users, wherein SE Linux is a little bit of advanced. Okay. So default and recommended, it comes with SUSC. AppArmor comes with SUSC by default. CentOS will come with all Red Hat and Debian systems comes with SE Linux by default. So these are I just keep it for your reference because these are the important log files which you can take this as a reference, you can study on your own. WTMP is a log file which keep track of user login and logout. UTMP is a log file which keeps track of active users. Last log is which keeps of when did the last user logged in. SU log is when you do SU log contains that information. HTTP logs will contain web server logs. Syslog will contain all the information. Syslog D is a very important log which contains everything activity happening in your system, whether it could be user logging in one particular process accessing other files. FTP logs is all your FTP server logs. Mail log is all let's say if your system is used to send mails, everything will be contained in the mail log. So these are the important log files which are there in your Linux system, which you need to have. If you want to audit your Linux system, you can use OpenSAP. You can see here, OpenSAP, this is a tool which has been used to scan the Linux systems. You can see on your right-hand side, ensure, I'm reading it, ensure var log located on a separate partition. It says fail because he's using the same partition to store the logs as well as the operating system. And also temp partition is also on the same. So this OpenSAP is basically a configuration scan which will validate again the industry best practices and it will generate a report. In terms of disk partition, it tells you you're storing var log on the same partition, you need to create a separate partition. You're storing temp on a same partition, make sure you do it on a separate partition. You can use this tool, OpenSAP. This OpenSAP has a different scoring system for different, like for Red Hat, you have a different template which you can use to scan. Even for CentOS, Fedora, you have a different template. You can basically go ahead and scan it. So sorry if I've run a little fast, but that's pretty much it on Linux security. Now I think I have another 8 to 10 minutes to 8 minutes for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vijay, for this deep dive into Windows security and Linux security. I'm sure by seeing the enthusiasm and questions of the participants, you have kept them engaged quite nicely throughout this longish webinar. So, looking at the chat for questions, uh,
One
yeah,
sec,
so we
let
got
me.
one question where is server core and DOS the same?
One sec. I'm trying to find the
Yeah,
chat.
we'd like to request the participants to please type in your questions in the chat.
Sorry, I'm not able to see the chat window. One second.
You're not able to see the chat window, Vijay?
Yeah. Mm.
Okay, so the question is, server core and DOS the same?
No. Okay.
They're not the same.
So yeah, there. Okay. So server core is an installation option. Okay. Wherein you're talking about the command line terminal, which is okay. So DOS was the first operating system which came in. Server core is like, let's say I'm installing a server, I'm installing an operating system, but I want a CLI version, like a base minimum version of the operating system. I do not want GUI. That is server core. It's just an installation option. It is not an operating system. You can go with the same operating system with the core option, which means you can install the role, you can do all the config changes via a command. There will be no GUI. That's what server core option is. Okay. Uh, I'm just trying to find the, yeah, I am able to see the
Okay,
chat window.
there is another question. WSL2, how does it differ from SIGWIN?
What is WSL2? How does it differ from signing? I'm not sure what WSL is. Can you do a example?
CYGWIN, how does it differ from SIGWIN? CYGWIN.
Windows subsystem for Linux. No, Sigwin is for Windows, not for Linux. Wherein I am assuming WSL is a Windows subsystem for Linux, right? Chandra Molishwar, can you unmute him so that I can talk to him?
Yeah, just a second. SISEC control room, can you please unmute Chandramoulishwaran? Yeah, we are just unmuting.
Hello, this is Mauli. The WSL2 is the Windows. It comes with Windows where you can run Ubuntu. You can install any of the flavors of Linux, and it's much faster than running it on a virtual machine.
So is it like Windows subsystem?
Oh yeah, it's part of Windows released. WSL2 is you can install it, and then you can on top of the WSL2 you can bring in any flavor of Linux, and you can run both Linux as well as Windows on the same machine.
Is it similar to virtual machine or different?
It is actually different because it is well integrated into Windows. Virtual machine will be far slower in terms of performance, whereas WSL2 allows you as if you are running it on a Linux installation, but you are actually it's the WSL and the Windows are in parallel. Actually, they don't run on each other, but it's much faster. And I think Microsoft has allowed the Linux to be part of Windows by introducing this WSL2. I think 2 years back it has come.
Oh, okay. But I'm not sure if you can go to production with WSL. It's
That
only
I'm
for,
not sure.
yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's only for you guys to learn, I think, to provide support for Windows within, I'm not sure,
Yeah,
just reading up. It's for developers. It lets developers install Linux distributions, use Linux applications. Yeah, it's similar to Cygwin only, but it is more integrated into the operating system, as
correct.
I understand.
You are right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's something new. Thanks, Chandra.
Yeah, so we have another question. Can you please show how to set SUID and SGID? If it
Okay,
is CH mode, what's the code for it?
yeah, I'm gonna send the link because I can't use it on my work laptop, but I will definitely send you the link in the chat. I knew that most of the people would have questions around this. One sec. I'm gonna find. So that's a command I've put it in the chat, so you can refer to that. 1 second. So I pasted the link. You can study about the commands and everything there. So that's there. I can't run that in my work laptop. You can that link has a pretty good explanation on
Oh, thank
how
you.
to set.
That's yeah, yeah. I think uh, they'll understand that, and obviously you can't run it right now on your laptop. We understand that too. So there's another question about Ubuntu. Does Ubuntu have resistance to malware? And
Okay.
how does one understand Kali Linux? Because it's a
Does
hacker
Ubuntu
OS,
have
so does it
has
mean that it is
resist?
resistant to hacking?
Does Ubuntu has resistance to malware? Kali Linux is a hacker OS. Does it mean Kali Linux is a resistance to hacking? Remember, Kali Linux is an operating system which has all the tools which is used by a security researcher. Okay, so Kali Linux is a Linux distribution which comes up with all the preloaded tools which anybody could use who's a pen tester. It could be any tools which is used by us. It is when you say hacker OS, it is an operating system which is preloaded with all the tools which could be used by any security professional. Okay, does Ubuntu has resistance to malwares? It depends on how the configuration is done. There are like recent releases of Ubuntu, which is secure by default. When I say secure by default, all the services are turned off by default. You have to enable them automatically if needed. And all the user informations doesn't have default passwords. If they have default passwords, you need to change the default passwords. If you create new users, make sure they then the services which are used, and you need to keep them updated. None of the systems are said to be 100% secure, but when they come with default no service, like default service, all the services disabled by default, but still as a user you have to enable certain services, you have to install the services on top of it. It depends on how we manage the configurations, secure configurations of the system, and how we patch them regularly. That's what makes the system secure and as well as robust from attacks. Make sense, Shamila? Kali Linux is not used in productions. It is used by the pen testers. It is used by the security professionals for testing certain websites, maybe to test certain websites, maybe to launch some. It is meant for It is meant to use by security professionals as well as by researchers and hackers, but it is not used in the production to run an application. No. Okay. So you can use Kali to run other applications, but it is not used by the company to run production applications. It is used by the security professionals and by the pen testers to do security testing. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think Vijay, we have come to the end of the Q&A. So I would like to thank Mr. Vijay Nagaraj for this very exhaustive deep dive into Windows security and Linux security. And I'm pretty sure, looking at the amount of content you have covered, it's almost 2 webinars into one. It might have been better if we had a separate one for Windows security and a separate one for Linux security, but nevertheless, I think you said you'll be sharing the slide deck, right?
Yeah, slide decks I can share, but I would encourage the participants to do more deep dive before you. If the students need some help into particular topic, I would say these are all very high level. You can do more deep dive into each particular, like OpenSAP. You can take it as one project. Go through OpenSAP, download the tools, run it on one Windows machine, run it on a Linux machine, study the results, and then compare it.
Okay, fine. So thank you, Vijay. Thank you very much. We'll sign off now, and hopefully we look forward to having you back for other webinars of CySecK and other training
Thanks,
programs of
everyone.
CySecK
Sorry.
in future too.
Yeah. Thanks for CySecK. Thank you, Abhishek, for making it work. I couldn't make it last week. Sorry about that. And thank you for everyone taking your time and attending this webinar. Hopefully it was useful. We'll see you again, everyone, maybe in another session. Thanks.
Thank you, Vijay. CySecK control room, I think you can end the session, please.